spiritual pilgrimage. He was born and reared in a religiously divided home in North Africa. His father was not a Christian. His mother was a Christian, sometimes described as very pious, but also somewhat simple in her faith. And Augustine grew up in this atmosphere where they were contesting religious views. And as a young man, he really decided to follow his father's way of life rather than his mother's way of life, though he was deeply impressed by her. Because of his brilliance, he went on to school and became not only a fine scholar, but an excellent teacher. And then a pattern developed by which he would master a philosophical school of thought, begin to teach it, tire of it, and move on. Then master another one, begin to teach it, tire of it, and move on, and so forth. So his heart was spiritually restless, trying to find an intellectual home as he traversed through the various philosophical schools of thought available in his time. Now, eventually he landed up with a group of people called the Manichaeans, and he spent a lot of time with them, the better part of a decade with them, and it's fair to say, I think, that never did he wholly escape the influence of the Manichaean community on his own life, even after he became a Christian. So we have this prayer, O Lord, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in Thee, summarizing Augustine's own intellectual and spiritual pilgrimage as he seeks something that will be satisfying to his mind as well as to his heart, and eventually he becomes a Christian. Now he is at home intellectually and spiritually. Okay, that's one side of Augustine. The other side of Augustine is summarized in a different prayer. That prayer goes like this: O Lord, give me chastity, but not yet. Okay, now we don't usually put that prayer on our bookmarks and refrigerator magnets and shoe horns and keychains and that sort of thing. That prayer is very much a part of Augustine's experience, but we tend not to put it on church bulletins. Well, Augustine tells us in his own Confessions that not only was he intellectually and spiritually a wanderer in his early life, but he was so sexually as well. Debates continue as to how licentious and promiscuous he truly was. Some people say that in his Confessions he's overly repentant and exaggerated the sins that he may have committed. But Augustine suggests to us that his sexual life was disordered, that he had found it as difficult to find sexual harmony and peace as he had found it difficult to find intellectual harmony and peace. Now, so the same pattern was established in his life. He would establish a relationship with some person that would last for a while, and then it would fall apart, and he'd move on and establish another one, and so forth. So there's a parallel between Augustine's personal history and his intellectual journeys here. Now, eventually, he settled down with one woman for the better part of a decade, and he had a son by her, but then he never married her because she was not of the right social class. So then when he became a Christian, he found himself engaged to another person to be married, even though he had this long-term relationship and a son. But in between the time that he concluded that relationship and was supposed to become married, he was sexually active with others, and so it was a mess, just a mess. So eventually, he becomes a Christian and puts away his mistress and doesn't function as a father, though he did have his son in some of his classes subsequently, but he begins to live the life of celibacy, a monk. So that's his personal history. And it's important for us to keep that history in mind because it affects what he has to say in his essay, The Good of Marriage. Now, let's put that essay in historical context. Augustine wrote this book, which is so influential right down to the present moment, in order to refute two errors as he understood them. One of them was the Manichaean error, which said marriage is evil because it is so physical, and everything physical is dark and ugly and wrong. Okay, so he wanted to refute that. But there was also a man named Jovinian who had wandered into Rome and was saying to people that in God's sight it's just as good to be married if one is honorable in one's activity in one's marriage as it is to be celibate. Now one might have thought that Augustine would say Jovinian is correct and the Manichaeans are wrong, but he was just as alarmed by the teachings of Jovinian as he was by the teachings of the Manichaeans. So he wanted to write a book that would simultaneously refute them both. And the way he did so was characteristic of his genius. He said, the point here is that marriage is good, and for that reason the Manichaeans are wrong. But marriage is not the supreme good, and for that reason the Jovinians are wrong. Marriage is a good, but not the ultimate good. It is a good secondarily, but not primarily. It is a good penultimately, but not ultimately. It is a good temporarily, but not permanently. So in all these ways, he affirmed the goodness of marriage while also lowering it on his scale of values than lifelong celibacy. Now, he developed in this book, The Good of Marriage, what I like to call the holy trinity of Christian sexual ethics. Three thoughts come together which shape Christian sexual thought all the way down the centuries after this. One thing that Augustine says in the essay, The Good of Marriage, the book, The Good of Marriage, is that marriage is a good because it increases fidelity. People who are married are less promiscuous, he thought, than people who are not married. So the good of fidelity is important to Augustine. Secondly, marriage is good because it is a way of providing children, offspring, reproduction. In a world of sin, people die, and they need to be replaced. And marriage is good in that respect as well. Notice this implies that marriage would not be necessary where people don't die. So marriage has a kind of remedial value in a world of sin and death. And then thirdly, marriage is good because it is an avenue of sacramental grace. Augustine didn't develop that too much. As we will see subsequently in other discussions, it was Thomas Aquinas who really developed that notion carefully. But in any case, what we have here is this triangle, the Holy Trinity of conceptual themes in Christian sexual thought that consists of three assertions. Marriage is good, marriage is a good, I should say, not the good. Marriage is a good because it increases fidelity, because it makes possible offspring, and because it is an avenue of sacramental grace. Now let's think about this and see what the ramifications have been historically. If marriage is a good because it increases fidelity, Christians are going to take a very dim view of divorce. And it is the case that over the centuries, Christians have had difficulty recognizing the appropriateness of divorce in some cases. This goes back in part to Augustine. Secondly, if we say that fidelity is a good aspect of marriage, if we say that offspring is a good aspect of marriage, anything that frustrates reproduction is morally questionable, right? That means all forms of artificial contraception and abortion are morally problematic. Now, traditional views of contraception and abortion are informed by things in addition to this notion that marriage is a good because of offspring. But